you. Um, Dana, Gary had a question on, you mentioned that you do outside audits, and his question was, who do you use, and how much education do you have to give them?
Okay, I can't answer who we use.
Okay.
I would have to check. So we do this as part of our annual BSA examination. And so when our auditor, our internal auditor, when he scopes our BSA exam and works with our board of directors on the exam scope, this is always part of what they put to the scope. You know, we go out to bid and we do move around our BSA auditor. So I don't really know who we used this year. It doesn't come to my mind. But so when our audit director, who's an employee of our, of our bank, when he's scoping it, he's really looking for a firm that is going to have the skill set to do everything that they need to do on the BSA exam, including the MSBs. And he does an analysis on the firms. He presents them to the board. So generally, the firms we're hiring to come in are actually very familiar with MSBs that do our exams.
Makes sense.
Ruth, I think there's also a second part to that question, is there are multiple third-party auditors out there that actually audit the MSB, which is a requirement, and many banks have that as their requirement, that that audit needs to be submitted to the bank as part of their due diligence. So there are a lot of companies out there that that's all they do is auditing of MSBs. So it's different than the actual BSA audit, so that the bank would commission. So they will look at the MSB's BSA program. They'll do some transaction testing as well on site. And you should be, as a bank, expecting that at least once a year from your MSB clients.
Hey, Radhika, is that an upcharge? Meaning it says that if that's something that's paid by the MSB and not the banking institution, correct?
That's correct. It's paid by the MSB because it is a requirement for them as well. Okay. So it is paid by the MSB. Sometimes the MSB will look to the bank for recommendations on who to use, but it is paid by them.
Hey, Ruth, I had another question basically for Tammy and Dana, and that is that, we've been in this pandemic, and maybe Dana, you're the best one because you've been in the MSB business for a period of time. Have you, with the pandemic that has taken place, has that changed the way that you're approaching your MSBs in 2020? Because it's you don't have the same connection than you did basically a year ago.
Right. Well, no, not really. The MSBs are highly dependent on being able to get cash from us, and most of our MSBs are in our branches on a daily basis. So we have continued to service them no differently. I mean, we obviously have all of our safety protocols. We did not close our branch lobbies. We do have social distancing and all the other safety protocols in order to, have our branch lobbies open. But the MSBs still visit us on a daily basis. It's really imperative for them to, bring us the checks that they have cashed, and also then to get the cash that they need for their next business day.
And I have one other follow-up question. I find this intriguing. For purposes of regulatory agencies, when they're coming in basically doing a BSA AML review, and you've got MSBs or MRBs or whatever it is, are you finding that they're bringing in specialists to basically look at this, or is it just somebody that's from the normal BSA AML team?
It's from their normal BSA team.
Okay.
May I ask a question, Ruth?
Absolutely.
So this is for the bankers out there as well, is I know that we're encouraging at this time, to look into this program, but Dana, as you said, you've gone from anywhere from 70 down to 52. Do you have that included in your BSA program as to when you will exit an MSB, and what are some of the reasons why? And same question to you, Tammy.
Yeah, so this is Dana. For us, It generally is comes down to they have activity that we're not comfortable with. They can't appropriately explain the activity that makes sense to us, or they're not cooperating with us. So I can't really answer the question if our policy really has some very specific things in it as to when they will exit, but it's generally, you know, what is our comfort level with what we're seeing? Now, obviously, if we're filing a bunch of SARs on the customer, because that's what we would do if we felt that we didn't understand their activity, we'd end up filing the SARs, and that would, you know, most likely start the exit situation.
Radhika, this is Tammy, and we would the same for us too. But another thing that we would also consider if there was any problems with their licensing, you know, did that not get renewed, or did they not have the proper paperwork, or did they not provide us with an audit that we requested? So we know that we've asked them for certain documents to be given to us, you know, when we do our EDDs and on a regular basis. So in the event they, like Dana said, did not cooperate or didn't get those to us, we would definitely consider exiting.
Do you guys have penalty fees that you, if somebody's slow on getting you the documents and it's causing some issues from a standpoint of BSA AML, rather than just basically exit them, it says, or can you upcharge them an additional fee basically for the additional maintenance or the additional work it's going to be necessary?
This is Dana. We don't. I do like that idea, but ultimately, if they didn't provide us with what we needed, we'd exit them no matter what. So I think the fee might be a good idea for getting them to respond quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea as well, and just we also have additional costs built in that are one-time fees for setup, and but also an annual fee that we want to use to cover our costs for the annual site visits or the annual EDD review. So we have implemented those additional fees as well.
Thank you. Radhika, Gary, any other questions before we move on to MRBs?
I think we keep going.
Okay, thanks, Tammy and Dana. And we'll continue. So next slide is talking about safely banking cannabis. RLR has been talking about this since 2017, even when my partner, who's my husband, told me that I was crazy to think banks would ever bank cannabis. And Radhika and I could probably spend at least 4 hours with you just talking about safely banking cannabis, but we want to hear from our panelists, specifically Tom and Dana, who are banking cannabis, and then Tammy, of course, if she has any additional thoughts. So I just wanted to start with some key definitions that I think, on the next slide, are important for banks to understand, because there seems to be a misunderstanding with some banks that we talk to about banking cannabis, and they say, well, we're banking cannabis, but we're not banking marijuana, or we're banking, you know, hemp. It gets all confusing. And I think it's very important that at a minimum, I mean, obviously a bank has to have a policy either that says, your policy says you're not knowingly banking cannabis. I would never say you're not banking cannabis, because if you're in a state that has legalized any sort of cannabis, you're probably banking cannabis, in our opinion. So your policy needs to say you're either not knowingly banking cannabis or you are. And Radical walk through the different tiers and definitions, etc. But I think it's just important that bankers understand marijuana is marijuana. I mean, it's Schedule I, it's illegal. We know that. Hemp has, less than 3%, 0.3% of the THC, and it basically has more industrial uses. But CBD is completely misunderstood in our opinion because it can be derived from marijuana. So when people are purchasing CBD products, they think that it is not derived from marijuana and it has no THC, and that is not always true. Again, you have to be clear on that one. So those are just some definitions that we think that banks should be aware of going into this. Quickly on the next slide, when we put this slide in the presentation, there were 33 states that have legal medical marijuana and 11 states that had recreational or marijuana, which now they're changing that term to adult marijuana instead of recreational, and 17 states had low THC CBD. That did change last night. Votes are still being counted in other states as well as here and well as everywhere, I guess. But New Jersey and Arizona had initiatives for recreational marijuana, and there were some initiatives for Montana and South Dakota. South Dakota mostly medical, I believe. So it's interesting that now we're approaching nearly 40 states that have some sort of legalization. I guess the key question is how many banks or how many financial institutions are banking cannabis. And it's interesting with all the reading and everything you do. I've read articles that have said there's only 10 financial institutions out there banking it, period, which is not true because we work with more than 10 that are banking it, up to 700. So there aren't crystal clear numbers. They base it off SARS filed and other things. But it's definitely, we're seeing more and more financial institutions understand how they can safely bank cannabis. Radhika, do you want to take us through the next slide on the tiers and talk a little bit about why that's important?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And as Ruth said, in the chart that we showed in the slide before that are dark green and light green, but it's really important. One of the most important things that she said is that most financial institutions probably unknowingly have some CBD and marijuana related business in their portfolio, may not know it. So strongly recommend that you look at your BSA policy and make sure that that knowingly term is implemented in there. So that's really important. There are 3 classifications of marijuana related banking, or now known as cannabis related banking, and tier 1 being, of course, as the highest risk. And that is anyone touching the marijuana plant. So examples include anyone that's dealing with the seed, marijuana dispensaries, the growers, the cultivators, anyone that's also extracting oil from THC, and marijuana infused products such as edibles. They would all be considered tier 1. Tier 2 specifically focuses on providers for tier 1. Meaning, for example, sellers of products such as their lighting and their water systems, the plastic vials or anything that the marijuana goes into, industry-related associations, payroll providers that provide services to them, tier 1 based businesses, advertising and media providers, and many of the software providers that you see out in the market today that provide the due diligence are considered tier 2. And tier 3 basically is anyone that doesn't fall into servicing really tier 1 as their primary objective. That could be people like accountants, lawyers, consultants such as Ruth and myself, commercial property owners. So those are typically classified as tier 3. Ruth?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I got a message